All right. So this week, this is week 3 out of 5. So thank you for being here today, and for those of you who are returning, thank you just for being here. So today we were going to talk about protection versus preparation. Last week we talked about worldview and how our kids pick up their worldview from the things that they see from us, as well as the things that they hear. And part of our role as parents is we have this innate desire to protect our kids. But today I want to talk about how we also need to be considering how we prepare our kids as well for life. And we have people in different stages of life here, different stages of parenting. Victorine has a son in college. You have a newborn. So we're all over the place. So some of this is going to apply in different ways depending on your stage of life and your stage of parenting, and even in your perspective on things. So again, one of the ground rules that we made when we set out for this class was just that we want to learn from each other. We want to encourage each other, but we also want to make sure that we respect how each other views the world and views parenting. Like I mentioned the first week, there isn't a clear-cut strategy that if you do all these things, even in this class, the stuff that we're going to talk about, it's not like if you do all these things exactly the way you've heard, things are going to go well. I wish that were true, because that means I might have figured something out, but we're all just kind of learning. So just even as we talk about this, people are going to have different perspectives on things, so we just want to make sure that we kind of consider just each other's perspectives that way. So today we're going to talk about this idea of these two, you see them on two different ends of the spectrum. So it's like they're not mutually exclusive, but we tend to maybe emphasize one more than the other. And we think about protection, it's like, how do I not only physically protect my kid, but even how do I protect them spiritually? How do I protect them socially? And then you think about preparation, it's like, well, how do I prepare my kid so that when they're not standing right in front of me, they're able to make wise decisions, or they are able, as they continue to grow and they start making their own decisions. Though you talked about your 3-year-old's already I'm deciding to ignore you. Pretty quickly our kids make decisions on their own. So how do we prepare our kids to make wise decisions? And as Christian parents, thinking about how do we prepare them for a spiritual future. So I want to look at 2 verses this morning, kind of think about how do we balance these 2 things out. So would somebody read Proverbs 29:15?
All right. Proverbs 29:15.
Yes.
The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child who gets his own way brings shame to his mother.
Cool. You might be familiar with that one. This idea that discipline is necessary. An undisciplined child is can cause a lot of disgrace to a family. Not only that, but cause themselves a lot of pain too. So this idea that discipline and correction, is an idea of how do we protect our kids, but also prepare them. And then somebody read Ephesians 6:4. Anybody want to read Ephesians?
I can.
Go for it.
Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord.
Cool. So we mentioned that one last week or weeks before. So it's this command to raise our kids up with discipline and instruction, because we are not only are we in charge of protecting them and providing space for them to have safety, but we also need to be thinking about how do we raise them to be grown people who can function well, and we can only protect kids so far. Danielle was at a party with some friends a couple weeks ago, and she was talking to one of the other parents whose daughter just started college, and she's away at school, and he was like really just like lamenting, like really just tore up, and he's like, I think I sheltered her too much because she's in a place where she's surrounded by so many more opportunities and so many more different people, and he was just really bothered by, like, he felt like he did not do an adequate job of preparing her. He kind of erred on the side of protection, which is interesting. Like, he's not even a Christian, but he just felt like I didn't prepare my kids enough, and I tried to keep them away from things, and now it's all laid in front of her, and there's so many options and so many different things that she's dealing with, and I didn't do a very good job of preparing her. And I think, you know, my daughter's going to graduate high school this year, and it's like, well, yeah, what I don't want to be thinking, you know, in some ways it's a little too late for that, but I also don't want to feel like the way that he felt, like that I had opportunities to maybe do better preparation, but I was trying too hard to protect her. We can go to great lengths to protect our kids, and we'll talk a bit more. If you're hearing me like say, don't protect your kids so far, please, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we all feel like there's things we want to keep our kids from. I know a parent who, when her daughter first got social media, she got an iPad, and basically the iPad mirrored her daughter's iPhone so that, you know, it had the same account, so all the messages and everything, you know, showed up on the iPad that showed up on her phone, thinking, okay, I'll be able to monitor what's going on, what she's looking at, who she's talking to, what she's saying. And very quickly she realized, like, kids send a lot of messages. And it became like almost like a full-time job, even just to monitor what was going on with her daughter. So even this idea of like, I wanted to protect her, like even trying to protect our kids sometimes is such an unwieldy task that we can't do everything. So we'll talk a little bit more about protection, but I do want you maybe at your tables just to share this idea. What are you most concerned about protecting your kids from? Obviously this is going to be very different in your stages of life, but what are you most concerned about protecting your kids from? So we'll take 5 minutes and chat about it. So. We're going to spend more time talking today about preparation, because in a lot of ways protection's easier to do. You know, like you can throw out your electronic devices, you can tell your kids that you're not going over to that friend's house. It's not totally easy, but certainly the ways that we can think about protecting our kids there's things that we can control, and the degree to which you feel like you need to control that, you can. But one of the things when we think about protection, I do think it's important to consider this. You know, again, this is where it's nice to have Becca here, who has younger kids and she deals with kids. So this might be a little bit more for people with older kids. I wonder how often we're overestimating our child's development or their capacity for wisdom when we think about, particularly I think in terms of technology. I see a lot of kids, you know, at the school or whatever, who are, you know, 4th or 5th grade, and they have an iPhone, and I'm just thinking they don't have the capacity to function well, and that's one of, I think, the biggest temptations for us today as parents is, you know, giving over technology to our kids, because it is their world. They're the first generation, you know, totally raised in a social media world. They have never not known the internet to be part of their lives. Things that we take for granted, you know, as you know, even something as simple as like sending a letter to somebody in the mail. It's like, why would you do that in 2022? They're just in a different generation, and so part of that is like they just are connected technologically. And I think one of the things I always caution parents about is in terms of you're giving over access to technology to your kids too early, it just can have some really serious consequences. Because I do think you look at your kids and you're like, well, they're probably mature enough, or I have this filter on our Wi-Fi, or I have this app on their phone. You can bypass all that. Like there's you know, there's only so many filters you can put on things. There's only so many apps that you can put on their phone. One of the things with technology, I read this week, is that between the ages of 10 and 12, changes in the brain make social rewards, which are compliments on a new hairstyle, laughter from a classmate. Those social rewards start to feel a lot more satisfying, specifically receptors for the happy hormones, oxytocin and dopamine. Sorry, we're getting super technical. They multiply in a part of the brain called the ventral striatum, making preteens extra sensitive to attention and admiration for others. All that to say, between 10 and 12, your kids really want attention. And so when you think about handing them a piece of technology, you know, particularly having a social media account that really is designed to put them at the center of the universe and to get them attention, it can be really addicting and make a lot of really terrible decisions from our kids, because I think we can overestimate their ability to handle some of that stuff. So that's my one soapbox thing, maybe for the whole class, is just like, your kid doesn't need a phone. Again, it is a social thing. We're gonna talk a little bit more today about making some decisions about how you prepare your kids and how you protect your kids are gonna set them apart from other families. You know, being a Christian is being set apart and being different. And that is not a comfortable place to be as an adult, but certainly as a kid, that can be even more uncomfortable. And so part of what we're going to talk about today is how you prepare your kids to do hard things. But in terms of protection, I will say this: it's always easier to loose the reins than to take them back. One of the things I learned early on as a camp counselor was you go in the week and you are really harsh about the rules like the first day, because otherwise you will get run over and forget about trying to get control back. Like if you can set the tone early that like, I'm in charge and you know, I deserve some respect and you're gonna listen to me, you can always like let go a little bit. But it's like trying to lasso a wild horse or something. It's like, once you've let them go, it's really hard to get them back. So in terms of things that we try to protect our kids from, I think it's absolutely our responsibility to do that. It's part of our role, but we also need to think about how do we prepare our kids to live on their own and to make decisions when they're away from us. One other thing I want to say about protection, because I've run into this a lot too with parents, is you and your spouse might not have the same standards on things. It might be a source of tension. I would encourage you to find a common ground on things and have each other's back. I know one family where the mom was really strict about the movies their kids watched, and anytime she was out of town, it was like movie night with dad, and it was like...
I feel seen right now.
Oh, good, yes. But it was like, essentially became like a don't tell mom situation, which if you're that parent, then like you're the cool parent all of a sudden. But it also creates a weird dynamic within your family of like, you know, let's keep things from one parent. And so when you think about what are your standards for your kids, make sure that you're on the same page, because that can just become really unhealthy within your family. So let's talk about preparation. And I think when we think about this, really the best protection we can offer our kids is preparing them to engage the world biblically. Your kids are going to be in a situation at some point where you're not around and they have to make a decision for themselves. and you want to make sure that they have been equipped to engage that situation, both from your standards, but more importantly from God's standards. I remember the first time I ever saw pornography was at a friend's house. I was over at a friend's house. His parents weren't there. I don't even know if my parents knew that his parents weren't going to be there, but it was like he knew where his dad's stash of porn was. And it was like, I was like, oh, okay, cool. It wasn't something that, my parents had ever talked about with me. I was not prepared to think critically about what I was about to get into there. I think it was like 10 years old, and it was just at a friend's house. You send your kids to somebody else's house and you just assume, oh, they're gonna play outside or whatever. You just don't know. We've had it here at the school. Kids pull up pornography on their phones after school and are looking at it together because they're on a cell phone, on a cell line. They're not. The Wi-Fi filter no longer relevant. You have your own phone. You have no filters. So your kids are going to be exposed to things regardless of how much you protect them, that you have to be ready, have to be preparing them for. And so I think a really great example of this is how Jesus interacted with the disciples. So if you turn to John 17, does someone read, let's say 9 through 12, and then somebody else 13 through 18?
I'll do the first half,
Okay,
which was 9 through
12.
Okay.
And somebody want to do 13 through 18? All right, cool.
I pray for them.
And so this is Jesus praying on behalf of his disciples, just to give context. Sorry.
I pray for them. I am not praying for the world, but for those you have given me, for they are yours. All I have is yours, and all you have is mine. And glory has come to me through them. I will remain in the world no longer, but they are still in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me, so that they may be one as we are one. While I was with them, I protected them and kept them safe by that name you gave me. None has been lost except the one doomed to destruction, so that Scripture would be fulfilled.
13, yep, 13 through 18.
I am coming to you now, but I say these things while I am still in the world, so that they may have the full measure of my joy within them. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, for they are not of the world any more than I am of the world. My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world.
Cool, thanks. So I really like this because it's this picture that Jesus, he's praying on behalf of his disciples who he's spent these years with, training them. But he uses the word protection several times. And he talks about, in verse 12, that during his time here, during Jesus' time here, he protected them. But now he's praying for them as he sends them out into the world. And I think it's a good picture of this like dual role that we have as parents is, Jesus spent time, he understood he had to prepare the disciples to do the work that was ahead of them, that was going to happen without Jesus' physical presence there. But he also knew, they were fishermen and tax collectors, and they were not, ready from day one to just go out and do things. Like Jesus protected them, both physically from harm, but also just in terms of guiding them in growing and understanding what was before them. And so I think we have a very similar role as parents, that we need to be protecting our kids, but preparing them to be in the world, I mean, I think even in terms of how Jesus talks about the disciples, he's talking about sending them out into the world. And so we all have our kids in our houses for some period of time. Maybe it's 18 years, maybe 28 years, I don't know. You can start charging rent, I think, after 18. It's the law or something like that. But at some point, they're gonna go live their own lives as adults. But even more than that, you're gonna put them on sports teams, and you're gonna send them to school. You're going to have them be friends with people. Our kids, they represent us, but they also represent Christ. And so even in terms of thinking about, we tend to think about the phrase, you know, in the world, but not of the world. But the actual like thought behind that is, it's not of the world, but into the world. Like, we are to be people, we're to be light in the world. It's not just that we live, you know, with no connection to people around us. I mean, that's part of what we did yesterday at the neighboring seminar, is this concept of like, we live in the world, but we've been sent into the world. And so thinking as parents, how do we prepare our kids to be Christians into the world, not just to live in it, but to actually impact it. And so that's kind of where the framework that we're gonna go from here as we talk about preparation. And really when I think about preparation, I think the key to preparation has to be conversation. We spend a lot of time in one-way talks with our kids, I'm guessing. If you're like me, I like to rant to my kids, or here's my idea about this, or wow, I really wish you hadn't done this, and let me give you the reasons why. Which, you know, obviously at times is appropriate. It's part of discipline, is like, you need to hear the truth. But part of, you know, as your kids grow, it has to be more of a conversation, that there is a two-way interaction. Again, it doesn't mean there's not times for lecture, but what happens when you have a conversation with somebody and it's a two-way versus just somebody who just talks at you? What is the difference for you as a person when that happens? What is somebody actually like engaging you? What's that make you feel? What's that tell you about the person?
They should feel connected.
Okay. Yeah, you feel connected?
They value my opinion.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, you value that person's opinion, or they value yours.
I'm going to give you inputs.
What's that?
Their own inputs.
Okay, yeah, you want their input, so you value their ideas too.
It's comfortable.
Okay.
Maybe it's uncomfortable, depending on the topic.
That's true. Yeah, some topics you're like, how quick can you just talk and just be over?
But when you're the one that's ranting at them, they feel kind of small, I think. So when you engage and invite them to be a part of it, it makes it more comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we've all experienced somebody just talking at us or maybe talking down to us, which I think is easy as a parent to put yourself in that role, because it's quicker. Like, in terms of like communicating information, it's quicker just to like talk at somebody. Let me give you the list or give me the reasons, and that's it. A conversation creates a relationship, like Michelle talked about. It creates a connection. And I think in terms of, we think about our kids growing over the long term, that connection is invaluable. The more that you create a safe space in your house for conversation, I think the better prepared your kids are going to be, the better connection you're going to have with your kids. If they feel that it's okay to ask a question about something, if it's okay to raise a doubt about something, that's huge. Because again, your kids are going to have questions about things, and they're going to have their own curiosities. You know, one of the things we think about as parents, probably you felt like this, is why is my kid not just a facsimile of me? Like, why don't they think exactly the way I think? Anybody have kids like that? You're like, why does my kid think like that? I don't think like that. They have their own personalities, their own ways of processing information. We have to be okay with entertaining that and valuing that. And part of having a space, in what I've seen in families that's been really positive, is when you have an environment where conversations are okay, even the uncomfortable conversations are okay, that makes restoration a lot easier too, because your kid feels that like I can share something that's uncomfortable with my parents and they're not gonna just default to the lecture or be like, I told you so, or whatever. Like that's part of restoring our kids, is being able to work through, okay, so why did you do that? Or we're praying with them, we're just having a conversation. That's huge, because our kids, again, they're gonna face situations that we can't prepare our kids for everything, but we need to be able to have a place where we can follow up with them. That makes sense. Like, you can't protect them from everything, you can't prepare them for everything, but at least you can create an environment where they can have a conversation with you. So, let's, I'm going to talk just a little bit more, and we're going to have discussion at the end. Otherwise, it's a little choppy. So I want to talk just in terms of like, part of this idea of preparation is teaching our kids discernment, which is really hard. Again, your kids are at different points in their brain functions. Even as teenagers, they just physically have a hard time conceptualizing long-term consequences. It's why kids do crazy things, and you're just like, why did you do that? And it's because they thought about it was going to be fun right now, not that might affect me 5 years from now or 10 years from now. Even just the way they process the world changes over time, and your brain really hasn't even fully formed until you're in your really late teens or early 20s. So a lot of times we want our kids to discern the world the way we do as adults, and you've probably been frustrated by that because I've been really frustrated by that. Why don't you understand that? So we want to be preparing our kids for discernment, and that's going to, again, happen incrementally over time. But I think it's really key to think about these two verses. Would somebody read 1 Peter 2:11?
Dear friends, I urge you, as foreigners and exiles, to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's this idea that like there's an actual battle going on in our souls for control, and we all experience that temptation to give in to sin. But even as we think about how we raise our kids, that mindset like this, we're preparing you for a lifelong battle for really your soul. And there's a lot of temptation around that. Somebody want to read Romans 12:1-2? And it goes along with the same kind of idea.
I'll read it.
All right.
I urge you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so when we think about preparing our kids, again, it gets back to forming their worldview. It's why we talked about worldview first, and considering, your own worldview and what are we communicating to our kids, because, verse 2, don't copy the world, the behavior and customs of this world. Let God transform you. Like that's something I think I find really comforting in terms of God's put in the mix there. Like in terms of my preparation for my kids, I have to be trusting that God is doing some work too. God obviously entrusts our kids to us, but He's involved in the process. But again, part of preparing our kids is preparing them to think very differently than all the messages that they're going to get. And again, I think that's why this concept is huge, because again, you can protect your kids from, we talked a lot about our table, from different worldviews. At some point, you run into that, whether it's as a teenager, whether it's an adult, you're going to run into, okay, wait, my framework with the world doesn't seem to match how most people think. And that can be really jarring. I mean, I went to a Christian college. I remember there were kids who were missionary kids who they'd only basically been around Christians their whole life. Their parents were, in foreign countries. They devoted themselves to missions. And they even come to a Christian college where there were much more freedoms, and it was like Mardi Gras in their brain. It was like, I don't even know how to process even within a Christian context. Like, I have freedom. There's people who had very different experiences than me growing up, and I always found it very strange. I was like, what have you been doing your whole life? But it came out of a context that was very controlled and very, monitored, and it was very Christian, and there's absolutely very much value to that. But a lot of them had not been prepared for the rest of the world doesn't think like that, or the rest of the world doesn't act like that. And so if our kids haven't been raised to kind of process how do they hold on to their faith while also engaging people, again, it's not to be withdrawn from the world, it's to be in the world. We have to be preparing them to think critically, because, again, not every filter is going to catch everything, so we need to help our kids create filters in their own minds and their own souls. So we need to give them tools for discernment,